I was 17 when I learned that silence has a sound. New Year's Eve in Kangiqsualujjuaq isn't like the cities. There are no fireworks over skyscrapers, no champagne toasts in crowded bars downtown. We're a small Inuit community in northern Quebec, about as far from the urban celebrations as you can get. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where you can't walk to the store without running into your cousin or your teacher or someone's grandmother who remembers when you were born. For New Year's, the whole town gathers. It's tradition. Has been for as long as I can remember. That year, 1998, turning into 1999, we packed into the Sachumabic School Gymnasium like we always did. The building was relatively new, built in 1993, modern by our standards. Concrete and metal with high ceilings and those industrial lights that buzz if you listen close enough. It had a good heating system, which mattered when the temperature outside dropped to -30. The gymnasium was big enough to hold most of the community, 400, maybe 500 people when everyone showed up. And everyone showed up for New Year's. I arrived around 9 in the evening with my parents and my younger brother Thomas. He was 12, excited about staying up past midnight. My mother had made bannock earlier in the day, and she carried it in a covered dish, still warm. The smell filled our truck on the drive over. My father didn't say much on the ride. He never did. Just drove carefully over the ice, his hands steady on the wheel, his eyes on the road that wound through our small town toward the school. The gymnasium was already half full when we got there. Kids were running around playing tag, weaving between the adults who stood in clusters, talking and laughing. Tables had been set up along the walls with food traditional dishes, mostly but also store-bought cookies and chips for the kids. Someone had hung streamers from the basketball hoops. They were gold and silver, catching the light every time someone ran past. My Uncle Pierre was setting up his accordion near the stage. He played at every community event, had been doing it since before I was born. I watched him adjust the microphone, test a few notes. The sound echoed off the walls in a way that made it seem bigger than it was, fuller. Marie found me about 20 minutes after we arrived. She was my cousin, Pierre's daughter, a year younger than me, but taller by a couple of inches. She had on a new sweater her mother had knitted, blue with white patterns around the collar. I remember thinking it looked warm. She pulled me toward the refreshment table and we stood there for a while, picking at food and watching people arrive. "Think we'll make it to midnight this year?" she asked. I shrugged. We'd both fallen asleep before midnight the year before, curled up on the bleachers while the adults danced. My mother had taken a picture of us, heads tilted together, mouths open. She'd shown it to everyone for weeks after. "I'm too old to fall asleep now," I said. Marie laughed. "We'll see." The evening passed the way it always did. The kids played games organized by some of the teenagers, duck, duck, goose, red light, green light, the kind of simple games that worked in a crowded gymnasium. The adults talked and ate, moved chairs into circles, caught up on gossip. Around 11, Pierre started playing music, traditional tunes first, the kind the elders liked. People clapped along. Some of the couples started square dancing, following the patterns they'd learned years ago, turning and stepping in time with the accordion. Thomas was playing with a group of younger kids near the far wall. I could see him from where I stood, his face flushed from running, his hair sticking up in the back the way it always did. My mother kept an eye on him from across the room, the way mothers do. My father had joined a group of men near the door. They were talking about something serious, their faces set in that particular way men get when they're discussing work or weather or politics. The building was warm, almost too warm with that many bodies packed inside. I'd taken off my sweater within the first hour and tied it around my waist. Marie had done the same. We moved through the crowd, saying hello to people we knew, dodging the younger kids who were still running despite their parents' warnings to slow down. Around midnight, everyone gathered for the countdown. Pierre stopped playing. Someone had brought a radio and they turned it up loud so we could hear the broadcast from Montreal. The whole room counted down together, voices overlapping, kids shouting, adults laughing. When midnight hit, there was cheering, hugging, kissing. My parents kissed each other and then both of them hugged me and Thomas. Marie's mother found us and hugged us both, wished us a happy new year in Inuktitut. The celebration continued after midnight. The dancing picked up again. More people joined in. The kids got a second wind and started running around again, their earlier tiredness forgotten. Someone brought out a guitar and played alongside Pierre's accordion. The sound was good, warm, the kind of music that makes you feel safe, surrounded by community. I remember checking my watch at 1 in the morning. I was tired but fighting it. Marie and I had claimed a spot near the refreshment table again, close to where someone had left a plate of cookies shaped like polar bears. They were decorated with white icing and little candy eyes. Thomas had made a game of trying to eat one without using his hands. Marie was telling me something about school, about a boy in her class who'd asked her to skate with him the week before. I was only half listening, watching the dancers spin and step across the gymnasium floor. The accordion music was loud but pleasant. It filled all the empty spaces in the room. That's when I noticed the time. 1:28 in the morning. I remember because I just looked at my watch when Marie stopped talking mid-sentence. The accordion cut off, not a gradual stop, not the end of a song, just stopped. The sound died in the middle of a note, hanging in the air for a fraction of a second before disappearing completely. I looked up. Pierre was standing at the microphone, his hands still on the accordion, but he wasn't playing. He was looking toward the north wall. His face had gone very still. The talking stopped next. Not all at once, but in a wave that moved through the room as people noticed the silence, turned to see what had caused it. The kids stopped running. A little girl near the stage froze mid-step, her arm raised to tag another child. The silence had weight. I could feel it pressing against my ears, against my chest. It made the room feel smaller somehow, like the walls had moved closer. Marie grabbed my arm. "What?" she started to say. Then I felt it, a vibration, low and deep, coming up through the floor. It traveled through my boots, up my legs, into my spine. My teeth rattled slightly. The kind of sensation you get standing near a train track when a train is coming. Except we were inside a building and there were no trains anywhere near Kangiqsualujjuaq. The lights flickered. Once, twice. The fluorescent tubes overhead buzzed louder than usual, then settled back to their normal hum. Someone near the door shouted something. I couldn't make out the words. My ears felt strange, pressurized, like I was underwater or on an airplane descending too fast. The vibration got stronger. I watched a cup on the refreshment table start to walk toward the edge, rattling against the plastic tablecloth. One of the streamers fell from the basketball hoop, floating down in the suddenly still air. My father was moving toward us. I could see him pushing through the crowd, his face set in that expression he got when something was wrong, but he was trying to stay calm. My mother was reaching for Thomas, pulling him close. The vibration became a sound, low, rumbling, growing louder by the second. It didn't sound like it was coming from any particular direction. It sounded like it was coming from everywhere at once. From the walls, from the floor, from the air itself. Pierre dropped his accordion. The sound it made hitting the floor was very small compared to the rumbling. Very distant. Someone screamed, and then the north wall exploded inward. I don't remember the exact moment of impact. My mind has a blank space there, a gap where the memory should be. 1 second, I was standing next to Marie by the refreshment table watching my father move toward us. The next second, I was on the ground, something heavy pressing against my legs, snow in my mouth, in my eyes, in my lungs. The sound was enormous. Not a crash, not a roar. Something beyond those words. Something that filled every space and pushed out all other sounds until there was nothing but pressure and weight and the sensation of the world turning over. I tried to breathe and choked. Snow. I was breathing snow. I coughed, turned my head to the side, tried again. Air this time, cold and sharp, mixed with dust and something that smelled like metal. My ears were ringing. A high, thin sound that cut through everything else. I blinked, trying to clear my vision. The overhead lights were still on, some of them, but they seemed dimmer than before, covered in something. Snow. The lights were covered in snow. I tried to sit up and couldn't. Something was across my legs. I reached down, felt metal, cold and rough under my fingers. I pulled, but it wouldn't move. My legs were trapped. "Marie," I said, or tried to say. My voice came out strange, muffled. I turned my head. She was next to me, on her hands and knees in the snow. Because there was snow inside the gymnasium. Not a dusting, not a little bit that had blown in through an open door. Deep snow. knee-deep where I was lying, deeper in some places. Marie's face was very white. She had blood on her forehead, a thin line running down toward her eye. She was looking at me but not seeing me. Her eyes were focused on something else, something past me. I followed her gaze. The north wall was gone, just gone. Where there had been concrete and metal and high windows, there was now an opening, a massive ragged hole that showed the darkness outside. And inside, where the gymnasium had been, was snow. Mountains of it. It had poured through the opening and spread across the floor, bringing pieces of the outside world with it. Rocks, ice, debris. A truck. There was a red pickup truck half buried in snow about 20 feet from me. I recognized it. It belonged to Mr. Ananak, one of the elders. It had been parked outside near the door. Now it was inside, tilted at an angle, its windshield shattered, snow piled against the driver's side door. My grandfather never talked about the war. Not directly, but he talked about planes. He could identify any aircraft by sound alone, could tell you the make and model of something flying overhead without even looking up. It was a skill he'd learned in the Army Air Forces, something that stayed with him long after he came home. In January of 1950, he was working as a civilian contractor at Great Falls Air Force Base in Montana. He was 32 years old, married to my grandmother for 6 years, with 2 small children at home. His job was mostly administrative, coordinating supply flights between bases, tracking cargo manifests, making sure the paperwork matched what was actually being loaded onto planes. Boring work, he said once. Safe work. The kind of job you take when you have a family to feed and you're tired of excitement. He told me this story once. Only once. It was winter, late in his life, and we were sitting in his living room watching snow fall outside the window. He'd been quiet for a long time, just watching the snow when he started talking. I don't know what made him think of it that day. Maybe the snow, maybe something else. I knew everyone on that flight, he said. Not well, most of them, but I knew their names. I'd processed their paperwork. January 26, 1950, a Thursday. My grandfather arrived at work early that morning, around 6 a.m. The base was already busy despite the hour. A C-54D Skymaster was scheduled to depart at 8:30, a routine transport flight from Anchorage to Great Falls. The plane would refuel, then continue on to other bases. Standard procedure. They did flights like this several times a week. The C-54D was a military transport aircraft. 4 engines. Reliable. It had been used extensively during the war and continued to be the workhorse of military transport in the late 1940s. The particular aircraft scheduled for that flight tail number 4272469 had a clean maintenance record. No significant issues, no red flags. My grandfather spent the morning reviewing the passenger and cargo manifests. 44 people were scheduled to be on board. Most of them were military personnel servicemen returning from duty in Alaska, some with families. There was a pregnant woman, a young mother with her child, a mix of Army, Air Force, and civilian contractors, all of them just trying to get from one place to another. He remembered some of the names, not all of them, but a few stuck with him. Captain Jerome Kreisman, the pilot. My grandfather had met him a few times. Quiet guy, professional, the kind of pilot who did everything by the book. Second Lieutenant Robert Martinez, co-pilot, younger, eager. This was supposed to be a routine flight for him. Good experience, nothing complicated. The pregnant woman's name was Helen. He didn't remember her last name, but he remembered processing her paperwork and thinking that she probably shouldn't be flying this late in her pregnancy. But it wasn't his place to say anything. She had approval. She had her ticket. She was going home. The weather report that morning was concerning but not alarming. Heavy snow expected over the Yukon, low visibility. But the C-54D was equipped for instrument flying. The crew was experienced. The base commander signed off on the flight. Everything was approved. My grandfather watched the plane taxi out at 8:27 a.m., 3 minutes ahead of schedule. He was standing near the operations building holding a clipboard, watching it move down the runway. The engines were loud. That particular sound that big radial engines make, a deep rumble that you feel in your chest. He watched it take off, watched it climb into the gray morning sky, watched it disappear into the clouds heading north. That was the last time anyone saw it. The flight plan had the C-54D flying north from Great Falls toward Canada, then northwest over the Yukon Territory before descending into Anchorage. The route took it over some of the most remote wilderness in North America. Mountains, forests, frozen lakes, the kind of terrain where you could walk for 100 miles and never see another person. The plane was supposed to check in at the Snag radio relay point near Ashikik in the Yukon. That check-in was scheduled for approximately 10:30 a.m. Mountain Time. The radio operator at Snag waited. 10:30 came and went. No contact. 11 o'clock. Still nothing. By 11:30, they started to worry. My grandfather was in the operations office when the call came in. The plane hadn't checked in. They'd tried to raise it on the radio. No response. He said he felt something drop in his stomach when he heard. Not panic. Not yet. But a cold, heavy feeling. Like knowing something was wrong but not wanting to admit it yet. They tried for another hour. Multiple radio frequencies. Different relay stations. Nothing. The C-54D had gone silent somewhere over the Yukon Territory. Just stopped responding. No distress call. No emergency transmission. Nothing. The Air Force scrambled a surge immediately. They called it Operation Mike. My grandfather said it was one of the largest searches ever conducted in that part of the world up to that point. They pulled in resources from multiple bases, planes, personnel, search and rescue teams, everyone who could help. But the weather wasn't cooperating. The storm that had been forecast that morning had developed into something worse. Heavy snow, high winds, visibility near zero. The search planes that went up could barely see the ground through the clouds and snow. They flew grid patterns over the suspected route, looking for any sign of wreckage, any smoke, any indication that a large aircraft had come down. They found nothing. My grandfather stayed at the base for 36 hours straight. He said he couldn't leave, couldn't go home to his family while those people were missing. He helped coordinate the search effort, tracked which areas had been covered, plotted new search grids as planes returned with negative reports. He drank coffee that had gone cold hours ago. He stared at maps until the lines blurred together. The snow continued for 3 days. 3 days where search operations were severely limited. They tried. They kept sending planes up whenever there was a break in the weather. But the visibility was so poor that pilots said finding anything would be nearly impossible. You could fly directly over a crash site and miss it completely if the wreckage was covered in snow. On the 4th day, the weather cleared. The search intensified. They expanded the search area, covered thousands of square miles of wilderness, more planes, more personnel. They brought in over 5,000 troops from Fort Richardson, 5,000 people looking for one plane. My grandfather said he started to understand what they were dealing with around day 5. The sheer scale of the wilderness. The Yukon Territory is larger than California. Most of it is completely uninhabited. Dense forest, mountain ranges, frozen rivers. The C-54D could have come down anywhere in that vast area, and if it was covered in snow, if it had crashed in a valley or been swallowed by trees, they might never find it. The search continued for weeks. They found other things during the search. Old wrecks from previous crashes, debris from different planes. Each time they spotted something, there was a moment of hope, quickly followed by disappointment. Wrong aircraft, wrong time period, not what they were looking for. By February, they still hadn't found anything. No wreckage, no bodies, no sign that the C-54D had ever existed beyond the paperwork my grandfather had filed and the people who remembered watching it take off. The family started arriving at the base. Wives, parents, children. My grandfather had to face them. Had to tell them that no, they hadn't found anything yet. Yes, they were still searching. No, he didn't know what had happened. He said that was the hardest part, looking into their eyes and seeing hope slowly die as the days passed. The pregnant woman's husband came. He asked my grandfather if he thought she'd survive the crash, if maybe they were out there somewhere, waiting to be rescued. My grandfather didn't know what to tell him. The temperature in the Yukon in late January routinely dropped to 40 below zero. If they'd survived the crash, if there had been a crash, they wouldn't have survived the cold. Not for more than a few hours. Maybe a day if they were lucky. But he couldn't say that. So he said they were still searching. They hadn't given up hope. The official search was scaled back in March. They didn't stop completely. Not officially. But the intensive daily operations ended. The thousands of troops were reassigned. The search planes returned to their regular duties. The consensus was that the plane had gone down somewhere in the Yukon wilderness, that weather and terrain had hidden the wreckage, and that unless someone stumbled across it by accident, it might never be found. My grandfather kept the passenger manifest. He wasn't supposed to. He should have filed it away in the official records, but he made a copy and kept it in a folder at home. 44 names. He said he looked at it sometimes over the years, reminded himself that they were real people, not just a missing plane, not just an unsolved mystery, real people with families and lives and plans for the future. He wondered what had happened. Everyone did. There were theories. Engine failure, ice on the wings, pilot error, structural failure, bad weather, navigation error, any number of things that could bring down an aircraft, but without wreckage. Without any evidence, they were just guesses. The most likely scenario, according to the accident investigators who eventually closed the case, was that the plane had encountered severe weather over the mountains. The pilot had probably tried to navigate through it, flying by instruments. Maybe they'd gotten disoriented. Maybe they'd hit a mountain. However it happened, the plane had come down somewhere in that vast wilderness, and the forest had swallowed it whole. My grandfather retired from the Air Force contractor work in 1967. He'd spent 17 years dealing with the paperwork of military aviation, and he said he never got used to seeing accident reports. There were other crashes over the years, other planes that went down. Some of them were found, some of them weren't, but the C-54D was the one that stayed with him. I still think about them sometimes, he told me that day while we watched the snowfall, especially in winter. I'll see snow like this and I'll think about that plane, about all those people, about that pregnant woman and her baby that never got born, about the little boy traveling with his mother, about the crew who probably never knew what hit them. He was quiet for a minute. The snow kept falling outside, thick and heavy, the kind that erases everything. The worst part is not knowing, he said. If they'd found the wreckage, at least there would be closure. The families could bury their loved ones. They could know what happened. But with nothing, they're just gone, vanished, like they never existed. I asked him if he thought the plane would ever be found. He shook his head. 75 years of snow, 75 years of trees growing, 75 years of the forest reclaiming whatever's there. Even if someone walked past the wreckage, they might not recognize it. It could be scattered, buried, overgrown, just pieces of metal in the woods. That was in 2015. My grandfather died in 2017. He was 99 years old. At his funeral, I found the folder among his papers. The passenger manifest from the C-54D. 44 names, neatly typed on yellowed paper. He'd kept it for 67 years. I still have that folder. I look at it sometimes like he did. I read the names. I think about those people. About that Thursday morning in January 1950 when they got on a plane expecting to arrive safely at their destination. About how routine it must have seemed. Just another flight, just another day. I think about the moment when something went wrong. Whether it was sudden or gradual. Whether they knew they were in trouble. Whether they had time to be scared, or if it happened too fast for fear. I think about the Yukon wilderness, about how vast it is, about how many secrets it keeps, about how many things are lost in that frozen forest, buried under decades of snow and time. The official Air Force record lists the C-54D Skymaster, tail number 4272469, as missing. Not crashed, missing. Because without wreckage, without evidence, they can't officially declare it a crash. It's just gone. Somewhere between Great Falls and Anchorage, it vanished from the sky. 44 people. A crew of 5. 39 passengers, a pregnant woman, a little boy, people with names and families and lives that ended somewhere over the Yukon on a cold January day in 1950. Sometimes I look at satellite images of the Yukon Territory. I scroll through endless miles of forest and mountains, knowing that somewhere down there, probably buried under snow and trees and 75 years of growth, is a Douglas C-54D Skymaster, and inside it, or scattered around it, are the remains of 44 people who never made it home. The search officially ended decades ago, but I like to think someone's still looking. Some pilot flying over the wilderness, eyes scanning the ground below. Some hiker who stumbles across something unusual in the forest. Some hunter who finds a piece of metal that doesn't belong. Maybe one day someone will find them. Maybe the forest will finally give up its secret. Maybe those 44 names on the yellowed paper in my drawer will finally get closure. But probably not. Probably they'll stay missing, lost, vanished, somewhere in the vast white silence of the Canadian wilderness where the snow falls and the trees grow and the only witnesses are mountains that don't speak. I still watch the snow fall in winter, and sometimes, like my grandfather, I think about them. I wonder where they are. I wonder if they're together or scattered. I wonder if the forest has been kind to them, or if time and weather have erased every trace. I wonder if they're waiting. If somewhere in that frozen silence, under 75 years of snow, there's a plane full of ghosts who still don't know they never made it home. I met Christine at a coffee shop in Vancouver 3 months after it happened. A mutual friend had connected us, thought we should talk. I was working on a piece about wilderness survival for a magazine, and Christine's story had made headlines in British Columbia. Woman survives night in tree well. Woman brought back from the dead. Miracle recovery. The headlines made it sound simple, clean, like a story with a happy ending. It wasn't simple. And I'm still not sure about the ending. Christine was 31 when we met. Slim, athletic, the kind of person you'd expect to be comfortable in the backcountry. She'd been skiing since she was a kid, knew the mountains around Vancouver better than most people know their own neighborhoods. She wasn't reckless. That's important to understand. She wasn't some tourist who'd wandered off a marked trail with no experience. She knew what she was doing. We sat in the back corner of the coffee shop, away from the other customers. She ordered tea, but didn't drink it, just held the cup in both hands, warming them, even though it was April and not particularly cold. I don't remember most of it, she said. That was the first thing she told me. People want to know what it was like, what I was thinking, what I felt. But I don't remember. There are pieces, fragments. But mostly, it's just blank. She agreed to tell me what she did remember. I told her she could stop anytime she wanted. She nodded, looked down at her tea, and started talking. April 1, 2014. It should have been a perfect day. Christine had driven up to Garibaldi Provincial Park with 3 friends. They were planning to stay at the Elfin Lakes Hut, do some backcountry skiing, enjoy the late season snow. The weather was good, clear skies, not too cold. The kind of spring day that makes you forget winter was ever hard. They'd arrived at the hut in the late afternoon. The hut was basic wooden structure, bunks, a wood stove, but comfortable enough. There were other people there. A group of 6 skiers who'd arrived earlier. Everyone was friendly, shared food, told stories, made plans for the next day's skiing. Christine said she felt good that night, happy. She'd had a stressful few months at work, and this trip was exactly what she needed. The mountains, the quiet, the simplicity of being in the backcountry where your biggest concern is keeping warm and fed. The group stayed up late. Not excessively late, but later than you normally would in the backcountry. They were celebrating something. Someone's birthday, maybe. Christine wasn't sure, but there was wine. Not a lot, just enough to make everyone relaxed and talkative. Around 11 p.m., Christine decided she needed air. The hut was warm from the wood stove, packed with people, and she was feeling slightly claustrophobic. She told her friend she was going outside for a few minutes. They barely acknowledged her. Everyone was caught up in their own conversations. She stepped outside. The cold hit her immediately. It wasn't extreme, probably around -5°C, but it was sharp after the warmth of the hut. She was wearing her base layers, thermal shirt and pants, not enough for prolonged exposure, but fine for a few minutes outside. The moon was out. She remembered that clearly. The snow reflected the moonlight, made everything bright, almost like daylight, but softer, blue-tinted. She could see the mountains in the distance, dark shapes against the lighter sky. She walked away from the hut. Not far. Just far enough to have some space, some quiet. She could still see the light from the hut's windows, warm and yellow in the darkness. This is where her memory gets unclear. She thinks she walked about 10 meters from the trail, maybe 15. She was looking at the mountains, at the stars, at the way the moonlight caught the snow. She wasn't paying attention to where she was stepping. There's a phenomenon in the backcountry called a tree well. It happens when snow accumulates around a tree, but doesn't fill in the space near the trunk. The branches above act like an umbrella, keeping snow from falling directly at the base. This creates a hollow space around the tree well that can be several feet deep. From above, especially at night, these wells are almost impossible to see. The snow around them looks solid, level, safe. Christine stepped into one. She doesn't remember the fall. That part is completely gone from her memory. One moment she was standing on what looked like solid snow. The next moment, nothing. Blank space in her mind where the fall should be. The next thing she remembers is being upright, vertical, wedged into a narrow space. Snow pressing against her on all sides, her arms pinned against her body, her legs trapped below her. She couldn't move, couldn't turn. Could barely breathe. She tried to call out, managed to make some noise, but her voice was muffled by the snow, absorbed by it. Sound doesn't travel well in snow. It's like being wrapped in insulation. Everything becomes quiet, distant. Even your own voice sounds far away. She realized, with a clarity that she said felt almost detached, that she was in serious trouble. The tree well was deep, at least 2 meters, maybe more. She was at the bottom, wedged tightly between the tree trunk and the walls of snow. Above her was the hollow space that had swallowed her. Above that was the canopy of branches, and above that was the sky. But she couldn't see any of it. She was looking at snow, white, featureless, pressing in. She tried to move her arms, couldn't. Tried to move her legs, couldn't. Tried to move her bades, couldn't. She was stuck in a position that was almost standing, but tilted slightly backward, her weight supported by the snow around her. It was holding her up and trapping her at the same time. The cold started to register. She was wearing thermals, nothing else. No jacket, no gloves, no hat. Her feet had boots, but they were already getting cold. The snow against her body was pulling heat away, fast. She tried to think clearly. The hut was close, 10 meters, maybe 15. If she could just make enough noise, someone would hear her. Someone would come looking. She called out again, louder this time, put everything she had into it. The sound disappeared into the snow. Swallowed, gone. She tried again and again, shouted until her throat hurt, until her voice went hoarse, but the snow absorbed everything. And inside the hut, with the wood stove crackling and people talking and laughing, no one heard a thing. Time stopped making sense. She didn't know if she'd been in the well for 5 minutes or an hour. It felt like both. The cold was becoming the dominant sensation. Not painful yet, just present, insistent. A creeping numbness that started in her fingers and toes and began spreading. She kept trying to move, kept trying to free her arms. But the more she struggled, the more the snow seemed to compact around her. It wasn't fluffy powder, it was dense, heavy. The kind of snow that sets hard and holds firm. She noticed her breathing was becoming harder. Not impossible, just harder. Each breath required more effort than the last. She realized that the snow around her face was probably accumulating moisture from her breath, freezing, creating a barrier. She tried to move her head to create a small air pocket. Couldn't move enough to make a difference. That's when she started to get scared. Really scared. Not the adrenaline fear of the initial fall. The slow creeping fear that comes from understanding your situation. From doing the math in your head and not liking the answer. She was trapped. No one knew where she was. She was underdressed for the temperature. She couldn't move. She couldn't call for help effectively. And the cold was getting worse. She tried to think about what to do. Her mind felt fuzzy, slow. She recognized that as a bad sign. Hypothermia affects your thinking, makes you confused, makes you make poor decisions. She tried to fight it, tried to stay sharp, but it was like trying to think through fog. She thinks she might have passed out. She's not sure. There are gaps in her memory, moments of awareness followed by nothing. She'd come back to herself and realize time had passed, but she didn't know how much. Minutes, hours, the sky above the well would look the same. Dark. The cold would be worse. That's how she tracked time, by how cold she felt. At some point, she doesn't know when she stopped being scared. That's what she told me in the coffee shop. Said it was the strangest thing. The fear just went away. Didn't fade gradually. Just stopped. One moment she was terrified, and the next moment she felt calm. Peaceful even. She recognized that as a bad sign too. Hypothermia does that. Makes you feel warm when you're freezing. Makes you feel calm when you're dying. It's your body's way of shutting down, of easing you out. She let herself drift after that. Stopped fighting. Stopped trying to move or call out or stay alert. Just existed in the cold and the dark and the narrow space of the tree well. Her last clear thought was wondering if her friends had noticed she was gone yet. If they were looking for her. If they'd find her in time, then nothing. The group that found her the next morning wasn't her friends. It was the other parties staying at the hut. 6 experienced backcountry skiers and snowshoers who decided to start early. They left the hut around 7 a.m., heading out for a day of skiing. One of them saw something off the trail, a disturbance in the snow, a dark spot that didn't look right. They went to investigate. They found Christine in the tree well. She'd been there for approximately 8 hours. The temperature overnight had dropped to around -10 Celsius. She was in cardiac arrest, no pulse, not breathing. Her skin was gray. Her core body temperature had dropped so low that she should have been dead. One of the group was a paramedic. He started CPR immediately. The others helped. They took turns doing chest compressions, trying to get her heart started again. They assumed a helicopter would arrive quickly. That's what's supposed to happen in these situations. You call for help, and help comes. But there was no helicopter on standby for that area. The closest one was in Vancouver. It would take time to scramble it, time to fly it up, time Christine might not have, so they kept doing CPR. For hours, they took turns switching out when their arms got tired. 30 compressions, 2 rescue breaths, 30 compressions, 2 rescue breaths, 30 compressions, 2 rescue breaths, over and over, on their knees in the snow, working on a woman who showed no signs of life. Christine said she doesn't remember any of this. The rescue is as blank as the fall. She went into the tree well and she woke up in a hospital. Everything in between is just gone. She woke up at Vancouver General Hospital. It took her a moment to understand where she was. The bright lights, the beeping machines, the warm blankets, the IV in her arm. She tried to sit up and couldn't. Her body wouldn't cooperate. Everything felt heavy. Wrong. A nurse noticed she was awake, came over, asked her questions. Christine tried to answer, but her mouth wouldn't form the words properly. Her brain knew what she wanted to say, but her body wouldn't comply. The doctors came later, explained what had happened. She'd been found in a tree well. She'd been hypothermic, severe hypothermia. Her core temperature had been 24 degrees Celsius. Normal is 37. At 24, most people are dead. Your heart stops. Your brain shuts down. Your organs fail. But the cold had protected her. That's what the doctor said. When your body temperature drops that low, your metabolism slows dramatically. Your brain needs less oxygen. Your organs can survive longer without blood flow. It's like your body goes into suspended animation, not alive in the normal sense, but not quite dead either. The group that found her had kept her alive with CPR until the helicopter finally arrived. Then the paramedics on the helicopter had continued CPR during the flight to Vancouver. Then the hospital staff had taken over, slowly warming her body while continuing to support her heart and lungs artificially. It took hours, specialized equipment, a team of doctors who knew exactly what to do, but eventually her body temperature came up. Her heart started beating on its own. Her brain began functioning normally again. She was lucky, the doctors said. Lucky that the group found her when they did. Lucky that one of them knew CPR. Lucky that they didn't give up. Lucky that the hospital had the equipment and expertise to handle severe hypothermia cases. Lucky that the cold had been just right cold enough to protect her organs, but not so cold that it caused irreversible damage. But Christine said it didn't feel like luck. Not then. Not when she was lying in that hospital bed trying to process what had happened, trying to understand that she'd died and been brought back. She had complications. The frostbite wasn't as bad as it could have been, but her fingers and toes had numbness. Tingling. Reduced sensitivity. The doctor said it might improve over time. It might not. She'd have to wait and see. The psychological effects were harder to quantify. She had nightmares. Not about the tree well specifically, she couldn't remember enough of it to dream about it accurately, but about being trapped, about being cold, about being unable to move or breathe or call for help. She'd wake up in her apartment, warm and safe in her bed, and it would take several minutes to convince herself she wasn't in the snow. She stopped going into the backcountry, stopped skiing. Her friends invited her on trips, and she made excuses. Too busy with work, not feeling well. Maybe next time. She couldn't explain to them that the idea of being in the mountains again made her feel sick with anxiety, that the thought of snow touching her skin made her want to cry. She moved away from Vancouver eventually, couldn't stand being so close to the mountains. Every time she looked at them, she thought about the tree well, about the cold, about those 8 hours that were just blank space in her memory but that had somehow changed everything. When I asked her if she'd ever go back, she was quiet for a long time. Her tea had gone cold. She hadn't touched it. I don't know, she said finally. Part of me wants to prove that I'm not afraid, that it didn't break me. But another part of me thinks that's stupid, that I used up all my luck that night. That if I go back out there, the mountains will finish what they started. She looked at me then, really looked at me. Her eyes were very clear, very serious. People talk about it like it's a miracle, she said, like I'm some kind of inspiration. Woman survives impossible odds. Woman beats death, but they don't understand what it's like to have a hole in your memory where dying should be. To know that you were gone, really gone, and something brought you back. Sometimes I wonder if they should have. If maybe I was supposed to stay in that tree well. If maybe bringing me back was a mistake. I didn't know what to say to that. I still don't. We finished our interview. I wrote my article. It was published in the magazine with photos of Garibaldi Park and statistics about hypothermia survival rates. It was a good article. People liked it. They said it was inspiring. But I think about Christine sometimes. About what she said at the end of our conversation. About whether she'll ever go back to the mountains. About whether you can really survive something like that or if part of you stays in the snow forever. I've never been caught in a tree well. I've never experienced severe hypothermia. I've never died and been brought back. But I understand what she meant about the hole in her memory, about not knowing what happened in those missing hours but feeling like it changed everything anyway. Sometimes the scariest part isn't what you remember, it's what you don't. It's knowing that something happened to you, something fundamental, and you weren't even conscious for it. You were somewhere else. Somewhere dark and cold and quiet where time doesn't work the same way. And maybe you came back. Maybe your heart started beating again and your lungs started breathing again and your brain started thinking again. Maybe you walked out of the hospital and went back to your life. But maybe part of you is still there, still in the tree well, still in the cold, still in that narrow space between the snow and the tree trunk, in the dark, waiting. Christine moved to Toronto. Last I heard, she was working in an office. Climate controlled, no windows, no view of anything that might remind her of mountains or snow or the backcountry she used to love. I hope she's doing well. I hope she's doing well. I hope the numbness in her fingers and toes has improved. I hope the nightmares have stopped. But I think about her sometimes when I see snow, when I see tree wells, when I read about hypothermia cases or miraculous survivals or people who died and came back, and I wonder if survival is always the happy ending we think it is, or if sometimes coming back is the hard part. I didn't believe Darrow when he first told me what happened. This was February 2000, and we were sitting in my kitchen in Saskatoon, drinking coffee that had gone cold while he talked. He kept his hands wrapped around the mug like he was still trying to get warm, even though the heat in my apartment was running high enough that I'd cracked a window. "They just left you there?" I said. "In the middle of nowhere?" Darryl nodded. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his coffee, at the small circle of liquid that had condensed on the table around the base of his mug. His hands were shaking slightly. I'd known him for 3 years, since we'd worked together at the warehouse on 33rd Street, and I'd never seen his hands shake. "Queen Elizabeth Power Station," he said. 3 miles outside the city. They told me to get the fuck out and drove away. "What were you wearing?" He looked up at me then. His eyes were red, not from crying, but from something else. Exhaustion, maybe. Or fear that had settled in and hadn't left yet. "Jean jacket," he said. "T-shirt underneath. It was -28 that night." I put my coffee down. The number didn't make sense to me at first, -28. I tried to imagine being outside in that, wearing what he'd described, 3 miles from anything. My brain couldn't quite process it. It was the kind of cold that kills you. Not might kill you. Kills you? How long were you out there? Don't know exactly. Hour maybe. I walked, found the power station, banged on the door until someone let me in. He took a sip of his coffee, made a face. It had gone too cold. I got up and poured it out, made him a fresh cup. When I set it down in front of him, he wrapped his hands around it again in that same way, holding on like it was the only warm thing in the world. "Did you report it?" I asked. He laughed, short and bitter. "Yeah, I reported it. You know what they said? They said I was lying. Said I was drunk. Probably wandered out there myself and made up a story. Were you drunk? I'd had a couple beers. Wasn't falling down drunk. Wasn't doing anything illegal. I was just walking home." I sat back down. My coffee was cold too now, but I didn't bother making a new cup. Something about what he was saying was starting to sink in, starting to feel real in a way that made my stomach tight. "Why would they do that?" I asked. Darryl looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw something in his face that I'd seen before but had never wanted to name. Something that sat behind his eyes, old and tired and resigned. "You really asking me that?" he said quietly. I didn't answer, because I knew why he thought they'd done it. Because Darryl was Cree. Because this was Saskatoon. Because there were things that happened in the city that everyone knew about, but nobody talked about. That was January 28, 2000. Darryl survived, filed his complaint, pushed for an investigation even when people told him to let it go. Then they found Rodney Nastus. I heard about it on the radio the next day, January 29. Body found in a field near the Queen Elizabeth Power Station. Indigenous male, 25 years old. Frozen to death. They didn't say much else, just that the police were investigating. I called Darryl immediately. "Did you hear?" I said when he picked up. "Yeah." His voice was flat. "Dad, I heard. The power station. That's where I know." We didn't say anything for a minute. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. I could hear a TV in the background at his place, voices talking about something I couldn't make out. "It's not a coincidence," he said finally. "We don't know that. I know that. His voice got harder. I fucking know that. They drove him out there and left him. Just like they did to me, except he didn't find help in time. I wanted to argue with him. I wanted to say that it could have been something else, some other explanation, but I couldn't think of one that made sense. The power station was 3 miles outside the city. You didn't end up there by accident, not in the middle of winter, not in the middle of the night. 5 days later, they found Lawrence Wegner. February 3rd, 2000, another body, another field near the power station, another indigenous man frozen to death. 30 years old, last seen in police custody. I went to see Daryl that night. He didn't answer his door at first. I knocked 3 times before I heard movement inside, the sound of a lock turning. He opened the door but didn't invite me in, just stood there in the doorway, blocking it with his body. "You okay?" I asked. "No." "Can I come in?" He hesitated, then stepped aside. His apartment was dark. He hadn't turned on any lights except for one lamp in the corner that cast long shadows across the walls. The TV was off. The place was very quiet. We sat in his living room. He didn't offer me anything to drink this time, just sat in his chair by the window and looked out at the street below. 2 in a week, he said, both of them found in the same area I was left. Both of them frozen. "The police are investigating," I said. Even as I said it, I knew how weak it sounded. Daryl turned to look at me. "Are they? They have to. 2 deaths. 3. I stopped. "What?" 3 deaths. Rodney and Lawrence. "And you remember Neil Stonechild?" The name was familiar. I'd heard it somewhere before, but I couldn't place it. 1990, Daryl said. Found frozen in a field outside the city. 17 years old. Last seen in the back of a police cruiser. They said he wandered out there. Said he was drunk and got lost. That was 10 years ago. Yeah. And before that, there were others. People talk about it. Mostly indigenous people. Mostly people who don't trust the police because they've heard the stories their whole lives. What stories? He looked back out the window. The street light outside cast an orange glow across his face, made the shadows under his eyes look deeper. Starlight Tours, he said. That's what some people call them. The police pick you up, usually for being drunk or causing trouble, sometimes for nothing at all. Then they drive you out to the edge of the city and drop you off. Middle of winter, middle of nowhere. Tell you to walk home. I felt cold suddenly, even though the apartment was warm. How long has this been happening? Long time. My uncle told me about it when I was a kid. Said if the police ever picked me up, I should watch where they were driving. Said if they started heading out of the city, I should try to jump out of the car, even if it was moving. Better to break a leg than freeze to death in a field. Jesus. It's a game to them, I think. Or maybe it's not a game. Maybe it's just what they do. Get rid of the problem. Drive the drunk Indian out of town and let winter handle it. Most people survive. Walk back. Don't report it because who's going to believe them? They were drunk. They were causing trouble. They probably deserved it anyway. That's what people think. But these men died. Yeah, these men died. And probably others that nobody found, or that got written off as accidents, or that people just stopped asking about because it's easier to forget. I didn't know what to say to that. I sat there in the dark apartment, listening to the sound of traffic outside, trying to understand how something like this could happen, how it could keep happening, how everyone could know about it, but nothing would change. Daryl's case went to trial eventually. It took months. The 2 officers who'd picked him up, Dan Hatchen and Ken Munson, were charged, not with attempted murder, not with kidnapping, with unlawful confinement. The trial was in 2001, over a year after it happened. I went with Daryl on the first day. The courthouse was downtown, a big concrete building with too much security and not enough windows. We sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, waiting for his turn to testify. You nervous? I asked. No. He was staring straight ahead at the wall opposite us. Not nervous, just tired. Tired of telling the story, of having to prove it happened, of people looking at me like I'm making it up. or exaggerating or trying to get attention. You're not. I know I'm not. But that doesn't change how they look at me. When they called him in to testify, I couldn't go with him. I sat in the hallway for 2 hours watching people come and go. Lawyers in suits and families in their best clothes and police officers in uniform who didn't look at me when they walked past. When Daryl came out, his face was very still. He walked past me without stopping, headed straight for the exit. I followed him outside. He was standing on the steps of the courthouse, his hands in his pockets, looking at the street. "How did it go?" I asked, about how I expected. What does that mean? It means they asked me if I was drunk, how much I'd had to drink, whether I had a history of alcohol problems, whether I'd been in trouble with the police before, whether I had a reason to lie about what happened. Did they ask about what the officers did? Eventually. But mostly they wanted to know about me. What kind of person I am. Whether I'm reliable. Whether I'm telling the truth. The trial lasted weeks. In the end, both officers were found guilty of unlawful confinement. They got 8 months in prison. Light sentences, people said. Should have been more, people said. But at least it was something. At least someone had been held accountable. Except no one was ever charged with Rodney's death, or Lawrence's death. The investigations went nowhere. The official conclusion was that they died of exposure, but the circumstances remained unclear. No officers were charged. No one was held responsible. And Neil Stonechild's case was reopened, investigated by a commission that found the original investigation had been inadequate, found that he'd likely been in police custody before he died, found that the officers involved had probably lied about what happened. But by then it was too late. The officers had retired. The evidence was old. Nothing came of it. I kept in touch with Daryl after the trial. We'd meet for coffee sometimes, talk about work or hockey or anything except what had happened. He seemed better for a while, lighter, like testifying had taken something heavy off his shoulders. But then winter would come around again and he'd get quiet. He'd cancel plans. He'd stop answering his phone for days at a time. One night in January 2003, 3 years after it happened, I showed up at his apartment unannounced. He answered the door in sweatpants and a t-shirt, even though it was -30 outside. The heat in his apartment was running full blast. "You trying to cook yourself in here?" I asked. He let me in. The apartment was stifling. I took off my coat immediately, started to sweat. "Can't seem to get warm," he said. "Doesn't matter how high I turn the heat. Still feel cold." We sat in his living room. He'd been drinking. Not falling down drunk, but enough that I could smell it on him. There was a bottle on the coffee table, half empty. "Bad day?" I asked. "Bad season." He picked up the bottle, took a drink straight from it. "Every winter it comes back. I'll be fine all summer, all fall." Then the temperature drops and I start thinking about it. About being out there in the field. About how long I walked before I found the power station. About how cold it was. "You survived. I survived." He said it like it was a question, not a statement. Rodney didn't. Lawrence didn't. Neil didn't. How many others didn't? I don't know. Nobody knows. That's the thing. Nobody knows how many people got left out there. How many made it back and never said anything. How many died and got written off as accidents or drunks who got lost. The 2 officers who did it to me, they got 8 months. 8 months for leaving me to die. What about all the times before that? What about all the other officers who did the same thing? I didn't have an answer for that. I still don't. Daryl moved away from Saskatoon in 2005. Said he couldn't stay in the city anymore. Said every time he saw a police car he felt sick. Said he couldn't walk down certain streets without remembering. I haven't seen him in years. We lost touch after he moved. But every winter, when the temperature drops and the news starts reporting wind chill warnings and frostbite risks, I think about him. I think about that night in my kitchen when he told me what happened. I think about the way his hand shook when he held his coffee mug. And I think about the power station. About those fields on the outskirts of the city. About how many people might have walked through that snow trying to find their way back to warmth and safety. About how many didn't make it. The Starlight Tours weren't officially acknowledged by the police force for a long time. Some people still don't believe they happened. They say it's exaggeration, urban legend, people making excuses for their own poor decisions. But I believed Daryl. I believed him when he told me in my kitchen with his hands shaking and his eyes red. I believed him when I read about Rodney and Lawrence. I believed him when I learned about Neil and the others whose names I don't even know. Sometimes belief is all you can offer. Sometimes it has to be enough. I still live in Saskatoon. I drive past the power station sometimes when I'm heading out of the city. I always slow down when I do. I look at those fields, covered in snow most of the year, empty and white and quiet. And I wonder how many stories are buried out there. How many voices went silent in that cold. How many people fought their way through the darkness, trying to find light, trying to find warmth, trying to find warmth, trying to find someone who would help. I wonder how many are still trying. I was working as a paramedic in Regina when the call came in. February 23, 1994. It was a Wednesday morning, bitterly cold even by Saskatchewan standards. The kind of cold that makes your nose hairs freeze when you breathe in. The kind that turns your breath to ice crystals in the air, -22 Celsius. With the wind chill, it felt closer to -35. We'd already done 3 calls that morning. Slip and falls on icy sidewalks mostly. People who weren't used to how slippery it got when the temperature dropped this low. Standard winter stuff. I was hoping to get back to the station, warm up with some coffee, maybe catch a break before the next call. The radio crackled at 9:47 a.m. Dispatch sent us to Rouleau, a small town about 45 kilometers southwest of Regina. Unresponsive child, 2 years old. Possible hypothermia. That was all the information they had. My partner Derek was driving. He turned on the lights and we headed out. Neither of us said much during the drive. Unresponsive child calls are the worst. You try not to think about it too much while you're driving. You focus on the road, on getting there quickly but safely. You save the thinking for when you arrive and can see what you're dealing with. Rouleau is tiny. Population maybe 300 people. The kind of town where everyone knows everyone and nothing much happens. We found the address easily. A small house on a residential street. Single story, modest. The front yard was covered in snow, undisturbed except for a set of footprints leading from the house to the street and back. A woman was standing on the front porch when we pulled up. She was in her 30s wearing jeans and a sweatshirt, no coat despite the cold. Her face was very pale. She was crying. We grabbed our equipment and ran up to the porch. Derek got there first. "What happened?" he asked. The woman couldn't speak at first, just pointed inside the house. Her hands were shaking, not from the cold, from something else. "My daughter," she finally managed. "Carly. She was outside. I don't know how long. She's not breathing." We went inside. The house was warm, too warm. The heat was turned up high, making the air thick and stuffy. A man was in the living room pacing. The father, I assumed. He looked like he was in shock, just walking back and forth, not looking at anything in particular. "Where is she?" I asked. The mother led us to a bedroom at the back of the house. Small room, child-sized bed, toys scattered on the floor. And on the bed, under several blankets, was the smallest person I'd ever seen look that color. Carly Kosolowski, 2 years old. 26 pounds according to the medical report I read later. She was lying on her back, completely still. Her skin was gray, not pale, gray, the color of concrete. Her lips were blue. Her eyes were partially open, but not focusing on anything. I touched her arm. It was hard, not stiff like rigor mortis. Hard, not stiff like rigor mortis. Hard, frozen. Like touching a piece of ice shaped like a child's arm. Derek checked for a pulse, shook his head. No pulse. He checked for breathing. Nothing. He looked at me and I saw what I was thinking reflected in his eyes. This child was dead, and been dead for a while. But we had to try. That's the job. You try until a doctor tells you to stop, even when it seems hopeless. Even when everything you're seeing tells you it's too late. I started chest compressions while Derek set up the oxygen. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. The routine was automatic. I'd done it hundreds of times. But this was different. The child's chest was rigid under my hands. Cold. It didn't feel like I was compressing anything. It felt like I was pushing on frozen meat. The mother was in the doorway watching. She was still crying, but silently now. Just tears running down her face while she watched us work on her daughter. What happened? I asked while I continued compressions. How long was she outside? The mother's voice was very quiet. I don't know. Maybe 5 hours. Her father left for work early this morning. Around 4:30. She must have woken up, must have gone outside looking for him. I didn't know until I woke up at 9. I found her on the front porch. She couldn't get back in. She's too small to reach the door handle. 5 hours. 5 hours outside in minus 22-degree weather. Wearing what? I looked at the clothes on the floor near the bed. Winter coat, boots. She'd been dressed at least. But still, 5 hours. I kept doing compressions. Derek was getting a line ready for IV. We needed to warm her core temperature. But slowly, too fast and you risk cardiac arrest, which seemed almost funny given that her heart wasn't beating. But that's the protocol, slow and steady. We loaded her into the ambulance. The mother came with us. The father stayed behind. Someone had to stay. Someone had to wait. I don't know what he did while we were gone. I never asked. The drive to Regina was the longest 45 minutes of my career. I continued CPR the entire time. My arms were burning. My back ached. But I couldn't stop. Derek was driving as fast as he safely could, lights and sirens going. The mother sat in the jump seat, not saying anything, just watching me work on her daughter. The child didn't respond. No change. No signs of life. Her skin stayed gray. Her body stayed rigid. The only movement was what I was creating with the chest compressions. I remember thinking about my own kids during that drive. I had 2 daughters, 5 and 7 years old. I thought about them waking up in the morning, coming into my room, climbing into bed with me and my wife, warm and safe. I thought about this little girl waking up, looking for her father, going outside into the brutal cold, standing on the porch, trying the door, not understanding why it wouldn't open, getting colder, getting tired, sitting down, lying down, going to sleep. I pushed the thoughts away. Focused on the compressions. 30 and 2. 30 and 2. Keep going. We arrived at Regina General Hospital at 10:38 a.m. The ER team was ready for us. They'd been notified en route. They had warming protocols set up, specialized equipment, everything they needed for severe hypothermia. They took over the CPR while they got her set up. I stepped back, finally able to rest my arms. They hurt. My shoulders, my back, everything hurt. Derek and I stood against the wall watching the team work. They intubated her, started warming her blood, monitored her core temperature. It was 22 degrees Celsius when they first measured it. Normal is 37. At 22, the heart can't function. The brain can't function. Most organ systems have shut down. The ER doctor, I never got his name, was talking to his team in that calm, professional way doctors have during emergencies, giving orders, adjusting treatments, monitoring responses. He glanced at us once, caught my eye, and I saw something there. Not hope exactly, but determination. He wasn't ready to give up yet. They worked on her for over an hour, slowly bringing her temperature up, continuing CPR, giving medications, adjusting fluids. I watched the monitors, the flat line where her heart rhythm should have been, the temperature slowly climbing, 23 degrees, 24, 25. At around noon, something changed. One of the monitors started showing a rhythm. Not normal, not regular, but something. The doctor noticed immediately. We've got electrical activity, he said. The team adjusted their efforts, changed medications, fine-tuned the warming process. The rhythm on the monitor became more regular, more organized. It started to look like an actual heartbeat. At 12:17 p.m., the doctor checked her pulse manually. "We have a pulse," he said. The room changed after that. The tension didn't leave, but it shifted. From desperate to cautiously optimistic. They kept working, kept warming, kept monitoring. But now there was a rhythm to it. A pattern. They were working with something instead of against nothing. At 1:30 p.m., the doctor came out to the waiting room where Derek and I were sitting with the mother. The father had arrived by then. They were holding hands, not talking. Just holding on to each other. "She's stable," the doctor said. "We've got her core temperature up to 32 degrees. Her heart is beating on its own. We're moving her to intensive care." "Is she going to be okay?" the mother asked. The doctor hesitated. "I don't know yet. She's survived the initial crisis, but we won't know the extent of the damage for a while. The brain is particularly vulnerable to hypothermia. We'll need to run tests, see how she responds as she continues to warm up." "Can we see her?" "Soon. Let us get her settled in ICU first." Derek and I left after that. Our shift had technically ended hours ago. We needed to get the ambulance back, write our reports, debrief. I didn't sleep well that night. Kept seeing that gray skin, those partially open eyes, the rigid chest under my hands. I called the hospital the next day, asked about Kangiqsualujjuaq. They couldn't tell me much due to privacy rules, just that she was still in ICU, still stable, still being monitored. I called again 2 days later. Same information. Stable. ICU. No change. A week after the incident, Derek called me at home. He'd been following up too. "She's awake," he said. "What?" "The kid. Carly. She woke up yesterday. She's talking. Responsive. They're saying it's a miracle." I didn't know what to say. I'd been prepared for the worst. I'd been expecting to hear that she'd died or suffered severe brain damage or been left in a vegetative state. Those were the likely outcomes for a child who'd been clinically dead for over 5 hours, who'd had a core temperature of 22 degrees, who'd been frozen solid on a porch in Saskatchewan. But awake, talking, that wasn't supposed to happen. I read everything I could find about the case over the following weeks. The newspapers covered it extensively. Miracle child, amazing recovery, doctor is baffled. The stories all focused on how unlikely it was, how she'd beaten the odds, how it was almost impossible that she'd survived with minimal damage. The medical explanation, as far as I understood it, was that the extreme cold had actually protected her. When your body temperature drops that low, your metabolism slows dramatically. Your brain needs less oxygen. Your organs can survive longer without blood flow. It's like your body goes into a kind of suspended animation, not alive in the normal sense, but not quite dead either. The key is that she'd been cold before her heart stopped. If your heart stops when you're warm, your brain suffers irreversible damage within minutes. But if your heart stops when you're already hypothermic, the cold protects your brain, gives you time, a window where CPR can work even after your heart has been stopped for hours. But it's not guaranteed. Most people who experience severe hypothermia die or survive with significant brain damage. Carly was an exception, a statistical anomaly, a miracle if you believe in those. She did suffer some effects. The frostbite was significant. Her hands and feet had been exposed to the cold the longest. The tissue damage was severe. But she was young. Her body healed better than an adult's would have. The doctors were cautiously optimistic that she'd regain most function. I met her once, years later. I was at a conference in Regina about cold weather emergency response. Someone mentioned the Kangiqsualujjuaq case, and I said I'd been one of the paramedics on that call. They asked if I wanted to meet her. Her family had been invited to speak at the conference. She was 8 years old by then. Small for her age, but healthy. Bright eyes. Quick smile. She shook my hand when we were introduced. Her grip was firm. I looked at her hands. They looked normal, a little scarred maybe, but functional. "Do you remember that day?" I asked. She shook her head. "No. My mom told me what happened, but I don't remember any of it. That's probably for the best. My mom says you saved my life." I didn't know what to say to that. I just did my job. The doctors at the hospital, they're the ones who really saved you. Everyone says I'm a miracle, she said. She said it matter-of-factly, like stating her hair color or her age. Do you think I'm a miracle? I thought about that morning. About the gray skin and the frozen limbs and the flat line on the monitor. About 5 hours of CPR with no response. About a core temperature of 22 degrees. About all the ways that call should have ended with a death and didn't. Yeah, I said. I think you are, she smiled. Good, that's what everyone says. I wanted to make sure you thought so too. Her mother came over then, and they had to leave. I watched them walk away. The little girl who'd been frozen solid on a porch in Rouleau, who'd been clinically dead for hours, who shouldn't have survived, who shouldn't have woken up, who definitely shouldn't be walking around at a conference with no apparent disabilities, shaking hands and smiling like nothing had happened. I retired from paramedicine in 2010, 16 years on the job, hundreds of calls, dozens of deaths, a few saves that felt miraculous. But Kangiqsualujjuaq is the one I think about most, not because of what happened that morning. That's mostly a blur now. The compressions, the frozen child, the gray skin. Those details have faded with time, merged with all the other calls, all the other emergencies. I think about her because of what happened after. Because she survived. Because she woke up. Because she walked and talked and lived a normal life despite every medical probability saying she shouldn't. People ask me sometimes if I believe in miracles. Before February 23rd, 1994, I would have said no. I would have talked about medicine and science and probability, would have said that everything has an explanation, even if we don't always understand it. But I did chest compressions on a child with a core temperature of 22 degrees for over an hour. I felt her frozen chest under my hands. I saw the flat line on the monitor. I knew with absolute certainty that she was dead. And then she wasn't. The doctors can explain it. Hypothermia, reduced metabolism, cellular protection, timing, luck, the right interventions at the right moments. All of that is true. All of that is accurate. But I still remember what it felt like doing compressions on that frozen child. The absolute conviction that it was hopeless. That we were going through the motions because that's what we're trained to do. But that nothing would come of it, that she was gone, and I remember seeing her 8 years later. Alive, healthy, normal, shaking my hand with those hands that had been frostbitten and frozen and gray, looking at me with those eyes that had been partially open and unseeing in that bedroom in Rouleau. So do I believe in miracles? I believe in Kangiqsualujjuaq. I believe that on a February morning in Saskatchewan, something happened that shouldn't have happened. That the cold that should have killed her somehow saved her instead. That the time that should have caused irreversible damage somehow didn't. That all the factors that should have added up to death somehow, impossibly, added up to life. I don't know if that's a miracle. I don't know if it's science we don't fully understand yet. I don't know if it's just probability, that 1 in a million chance that actually happens because someone has to be that one. But I know I did CPR on a dead child for over an hour in the back of an ambulance. And I know that child grew up. Is growing up. Is out there somewhere living her life. And I know that sometimes, on very cold winter mornings when the temperature drops below -20, I think about that porch in Rouleau. About a 2-year-old girl who woke up looking for her father. Who went outside into the bitter cold. Who couldn't get back in. Who lay down on that porch and went to sleep. And I think about how she woke up, not there on the porch, but later, in a hospital, surrounded by people who'd refused to give up on her, who'd kept trying even when everything said it was too late. Sometimes I wonder what she remembers. If she has dreams about the cold, if she ever thinks about those 5 hours that she lost, if it bothers her that there's a blank space in her life where dying should be. But then I remember her at the conference, 8 years old, smiling, shaking hands, matter-of-factly calling herself a miracle. And I think maybe she's right. Maybe she is a miracle. Maybe that's the only word that fits. I'm 62 now, retired, living in Victoria where the weather is mild and winter rarely means anything more than rain. But I still follow the news from Saskatchewan. Still pay attention when I hear about cold weather emergencies. Still think about hypothermia cases and survival odds, and that thin line between life and death. And I still think about Carly. Wonder how she's doing. Wonder if she's in her 30s now with kids of her own. Wonder if she tells them about the morning she died and came back. Wonder if they believe her. I believe her. I was there.